Hello everyone, welcome back. There are so many books that I have not spoke about on this channel since the summer, so I thought I'd kind of do like a wrap up of all the books that I've read over summer. So this is basically like from June till August-ish. That's a kind of like time frame that I'm going to be going over. I didn't want to do too many because of otherwise I'll just be here forever. So I think I have about 10 books overall to talk about. Some of them I'm not including, so like I'm reading the Tokyo Ghoul manga series at the moment, but I'm not going to really talk about each individual one because I tend to read them just like one after the other, so they all kind of blur into one and I kind of get the overall storyline. So those won't be included, but I will include all the novels that I've read. So to start off the summer, I read Bat Eater by Kylie Lee Baker, and this is like up there as one of my favourite books of the year, if not my favourite book of the year so far. This is a horror novel and it follows Cora, who is a crime scene cleaner, and she witnesses the murder of her sister during the COVID pandemic right in front of her, and it's kind of dealing with the aftermath of that, as well as following Cora as she notices a pattern in the kind of like crime scenes that she's cleaning, and it seems to be targeting East Asian women. This is set during COVID, and like it deals with a lot of the kind of social commentary on like the racism that East Asian people experienced during COVID. And I really loved the blend of like the gruesome horror with this like really searing social commentary on racism and the way that people are treated, and even like in the most extreme situations. It's quite a gruesome book. And there's lots of gruesome like details about like deaths and the crime scenes, and it's, you know, not for the faint-hearted, but it also deals with all the topics so well, and I love the characters in this. I love like Cora and her kind of colleagues, so the people that she works with at the crime scenes. They're imperfect characters with like their own flaws and personalities, and I just felt so attached to them. They're kind of strange but likable in their own ways, and I love how this blends the mix of horror, kind of like Chinese traditions, and like hints of the supernatural in this, which I also really enjoyed. Needless to say, I gave this 5 stars. Then next up, I read Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry, and this I feel like I have a controversial opinion on. I actually didn't mind it. I feel like I see so many negative reviews of this book. I was surprised. I liked it way more than I thought I was going to. I think because I went in with my expectations to be so low that they actually were kind of like, I didn't find it too bad. So we have 2 writers who are basically competing for the rights to tell the story and like write the autobiography of this retired, reclusive kind of socialite. It sounds very similar to the plot of Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, where it's kind of recounting this woman's life and her like history and kind of like the lessons that she's learned through her life. Obviously it's Emily Henry, so there's a romance budding between the 2 writers, and I get people's criticisms of some of it was just boring, and we kind of get these chapters of what the characters are writing about this woman's life, and I get why people say they're boring because we don't have any reason to care about this character. It's just a random character, and I feel like if we'd got to know her a bit more before we got these kind of history of her life, I feel like I would be a bit more invested, because I felt like by the midway, kind of towards the end, like 75% of the way maybe, I was a bit more invested in those chapters. Like we didn't really need to hear about her great-great-great-grandfather and such. And like, I get that some of it is like tied to the story and the overall kind of like message of what she's trying to do with her book, but it also just wasn't very engaging. But I also didn't really mind it too much. There was just like a couple of chapters that I kind of wanted to skim over. As for the relationship, I feel like I'm in 2 minds about it. Long term, like obviously the characters, like this is a romance. It's not like a deep romance. But I enjoyed the kind of yearning between the characters, and they're obviously trying to keep their relationship professional, so they don't want to compromise it by doing anything because they're attracted to each other. And I like the kind of like yearning and the no, we shouldn't. Like I thought that part of like their chemistry was good. But other than that, I feel like long term, I'm like, I don't understand why they really like each other. They don't really have too much going. And it was too much in a short space of time at the end for them to be like, oh, so in love with each other. So, you know, if I kind of overwrite it in my head that they were like, oh no, we like each other and we want to get to know each other better, then it makes sense that, you know, after like 2 months that they're madly in love, or that they're not madly in love, they're just, you know, want to get to know each other better. So I gave this one 4 stars. And then I read Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. This I gave 5 stars because I loved it. I listened to the audiobook of this and I really enjoyed that. You have 3 different narrators for each of the characters. So this follows 3 different women in different time periods, and their tales all kind of converge at the end in some way. And it's a tale of vampirism, of female sexuality and gaining agency and being empowered in their sexuality. And I loved the kind of like gothic, amoral depiction of vampires in this. I won't go too into the plot other than we look at kind of each character and get to know them and their kind of like origins through their life, and then how they become entangled in each other's lives. But I loved the way that the vampires were done in this. It was very, very, and I think the history of vampires, when you look at things like Interview with the Vampire and Anne Rice's depiction of vampires, they are very queer, they're very gothic, and they're very melodramatic and amoral, and they kind of fit that archetype. And I feel like the vampires in this kind of follow that kind of vibe of not being like how they're described as like toxic lesbian vampires. They're quite toxic in the sense that there's elements of not being the most moral, especially the longer you are a vampire. And I love the way that she uses a kind of like vampirism. I'm saying it like it's a real kind of affliction that people have, but vampirism as kind of this way of showing women gaining agency in their lives throughout different time periods, and also kind of as a way of being empowered in their sexuality, because all 3 of the women are, I think they're all lesbians basically. And then next up I read Cursebound by Sarah El Arifi, which I also gave 5 stars. I loved this. This was a continuation of the story where it left off in Feybound, a fantasy novel. We follow characters from the Elven Kingdom, and they discover that actually the Fey are still alive, and they kind of get trapped in this Fey world. And the Fey are kind of trapped in a bubble and they can't really figure out why, and they're trapped as well, helping the Fae to try and figure out why they're trapped, how to get out. This is such a queer kind of romantasy, and I think that's what I love about it, is that it's very diverse, which I feel like you don't really see in romantasy and like fantasy as well. I feel like it's a really refreshing romantasy because the world is very queer and very accepting of queerness, of gender identity. It's all just very normalized, which I feel like is just refreshing to see. And in this one, because it's a sequel, it kind of follows on from the events of the last book, and we kind of get more development in the characters, we get more developments in their relationships, we get a new point of view from another character, which kind of then expands the world and also the kind of history of the world, the law and the politics and the kind of like political maneuverings that are happening in this book. And there's also lots of like political tension and things are really heating up. There's like hints of war brewing and X is coming back. There's like a lot of drama in this. The only kind of gripe I have is that there's certain secrets in the series that I feel like had been kept secret for too long and we still don't know the answers of it. But I can see that it's kind of building up for this final, kind of like the final reveal in the final book, I think. And then next up I read Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin. This is a kind of contemporary lit fic. It follows a multitude of different characters, and there's this new product that's come out where you kind of have like a soft toy on wheels, and it kind of has a camera on it, and it's controlled by some stranger somewhere in the world. And you can either be someone that has one of these and has the stranger living there, or you can be the stranger that watches in someone else's house, like watches through this soft toy. It's a really weird concept. It just kind of follows different people who get these soft toys. They're called Kentukis, I think they're called like Kentukis. So they get these Kentukis and you follow the people that have them and you follow the people that are using them, and you kind of see the multitude of reasons why people get them. Like some get them out of curiosity, some get them out of loneliness, some are gifted them, and you kind of see all these things that raise different questions about like privacy. And I think especially in like today's day and age with the internet and like concerns about like your own privacy and how much you let strangers see. And I think it brings up some really interesting questions about things like that. I think it really raises some interesting points about how we feel parasocial to people, especially in one of the points of view. And I think it also raises questions about like parasocial relationships, where if you're a stranger watching people, having access to their house every day, you feel like you know them. And I guess that's the same as when you watch people online all the time. Like you feel like you know them, but you don't. You're only seeing parts of their lives. You're just an observer watching parts of their lives. And I think it raises lots of interesting kind of thought-provoking points about that. And then I read The Heart by David Sodergren, which I gave 4 stars. This is a horror book set in this kind of coastal town in Scotland that is on the verge of being redeveloped by a American capitalist who wants to redevelop the whole town into a golf course. So they're buying up all of these kind of houses. Half the village has disappeared and been bought out, and the developers are kind of threatening the remaining villagers who are there and kind of want to stay in their home. There's basically, I think it's like the main character Muriel and then maybe like 2 or 3 other kind of people who are still kind of holding the fort down. And it seems like they're fighting a losing battle. And amongst the final residents to be moved from this village, we follow Muriel, who one day discovers something creepy from the sea. This book had some really horror, gruesome scenes, and also just kind of disturbing scenes, and creepy and body horror, I think, in this. It was kind of creepy and disturbing, but also there was elements of it being kind of heartwarming. And I think we look a lot at the kind of horrors of capitalism and capitalists and people trying to redevelop land that isn't theirs and pushing people out of their homes. And we kind of see the growing tensions between the villagers and the kind of redevelopers, and also this kind of mysterious thing that Muriel has found in the sea and takes home with her. Muriel lost her husband many years ago, and I think this really takes a look at kind of grief and the kind of longing that you have for that person that's gone, which I think was the kind of part that was really heartbreaking in this. In my journal, I've written a mix of the horrors of real life, deep sea horror, humanity's ability to turn against each other, and solidarity in the face of capitalist evil, which I feel does sum it up quite well. I feel this also is quite extreme in some of its horror because there's such a threat to vulnerable people as well. So if you don't want to read about stuff like that, I think just be aware that there's quite extreme threat to people that are vulnerable, e.g. elderly people. And then next up, I read The Return by Rachel Harrison, which I gave 5 stars. Rachel Harrison has cemented herself as a favourite horror author of mine. So in this, we follow Elise, whose best friend went missing 2 years ago on a hike. And then one day, mysteriously, she turns up out of nowhere, completely fine, and she just can't remember what's happened to her or where she's been or anything like that. So Elise and her kind of friend group that she used to have with her best friend all kind of go and plan this weekend away to try and help Julie, her friend, reintegrate back into kind of the world and check and see how she is and kind of get together to kind of celebrate her reappearance, I guess. So the girls' retreat happens and they start to discover that Julie has come back different. Something isn't quite right with her. Kind of descends into this creepiness. All these different events are happening and it just has this build of suspense until you eventually find out kind of what's been happening with her. I really love the depiction of female friendships in this and kind of the rivalries and jealousies and the kind of ups and downs and the more realistic depiction of female friendships and how they're not always perfect, and also the kind of look at womanhood and what those things mean. I feel Rachel Harrison always does a really good job with looking at different topics like that, and I love the way that she kind of blends all these things together, the kind of creeping dread with all, while also looking at all of these characters who feel real and kind of unlikable because they have lots of flaws, but not too unlikable, a bit annoying sometimes, but not unlikable enough that you just can't be bothered to read about them or you don't want to read about them. So yes, 5 stars. I love Rachel Harrison's books. And then I read my most disappointing Emily Henry to date, which is You and Me on Vacation. What can I say about this book other than I didn't like it? Okay, so this is a friends to lovers romance, which I generally feel is something I would like. But the way it was done, it was just these 2 people who were clearly in love with each other. Both of them were clearly in love with each other. And they just kind of would not communicate. They kind of just had their own issues that got in the way of them being together. So then they just stayed friends that were secretly in love with each other, messed around with other people's emotions, getting other people mixed in with their mess. And I was just if they'd gone to therapy, their problems, none of this would have happened and no one would have got hurt. I feel friends to lovers works when people are friends and they're genuinely friends, and then over time they start to see each other in a different way, or something happens and they start to see each other in a different way, or they discover that it could be something more. They were almost emotionally cheating with each other, which isn't romantic, it's just weird. And then next up, I read Kim Ji-young, Born 1982, which I gave 5 stars. This is such a searing and hard-hitting look at the kind of misogyny and the sexism that's embedded in South Korean culture. So we follow Kim Ji-young, who has kind of had a bit of a breakdown, I think. She's had a bit of a breakdown, or she's kind of struggling with the kind of pressures placed on her And we kind of go through the story looking at her entire life from like her childhood to present. And we kind of look through everything that's got her to where she is. And also along the way, all of the depictions of how society has treated her and in turn other women. And also the kind of injustices against women that are kind of endemic and are kind of rooted in society. And I love how we see also kind of depictions of her mother and her mother's mother, the sacrifices that they've had to make and the way that they've been treated, and how things kind of slowly get a bit better, but still women just aren't treated the way that they should be, and how the society overall just generally favours men. I don't want to say too much, but it's such a good read and I recommend it to everyone basically. And then finally I read Children of Fallen God by Chris Broadbent, which is the second book in the War of Lost Hearts series. So this follows on from the events of the first one, which is Daughter of No Worlds. And I read that a couple of years ago and I saw someone say something about how there's such a big plot twist in this, like, such a big reveal, and they were watching people's reactions to finding out this kind of plot twist in this book. So I was like, oh, it kind of piqued my interest in the series again. So I picked it up. And I actually really loved this. And like the whole series has been like traditionally published, I think. So it's got like a re-release quite recently, I think in October. So I would recommend. I gave this 4 stars. It's not like a perfect series, but I really enjoyed reading it and kind of being back in this world. This is like technically a romantasy, but I feel like the first book is more romantasy, and then the second book is a lot more focused on the kind of like politics and the world and expanding the world, with like obviously some still bits of romance in there. So it follows main character Tasana, who was a slave, and she kind of wants to break free of this world. So eventually she manages to escape and she goes to join the Orders, who are kind of this like military power who she kind of wants to join in order to kind of overturn slavery and help all the people that she's left behind. So she does this and she agrees to basically having like a sentient being living in her head that kind of gives her extra powers. And in order to kind of join the Orders, she kind of has to train up and take this like exam basically to be able to join them. And this is where she meets Max, the kind of like main male character, who is kind of her romantic interest, and that he kind of trains her up. He's kind of this grumpy guy with like a very like long and tragic backstory, which we find out a lot more of in this book. But in the first book, we kind of get like the first glimpse of it, and they kind of like complement each other. She kind of brings him out of his shell and he helps her teach her all of these different things, and their relationship kind of goes from there. It's quite cute, like they're cute and on their own kind of like missions, and it's not too much romance. I feel like the plot leans a lot more towards like the military and also the kind of like political landscape and kind of expanding the world, because we also get a new point of view in this book, which I think really makes the kind of keeps the plot going and kind of expands the world and the magic and the politics. And you kind of get the impression that everything is kind of gonna converge at some point. And there's like a big plot twist in this, like I mentioned, which I did not see coming. I think some people probably might see it coming, but I didn't see it coming. I didn't know there was going to be like that. And I think the plot twist really helped me with the momentum of the book, because I think one of the things that I didn't like about this was that it is quite slow at times. Like it kind of feels like there's some parts where the pacing isn't quite right. Pacing is a little bit slow. I think particularly with some parts of the relationship, I think sometimes there's like threats introduced, but you kind of know that the characters aren't going to be killed by those threats, because of you kind of know that they're like the main characters. So when there's like a threat to a main character's life, it kind of doesn't hit the same way as it does with like maybe a more minor character, because you know that because the series is kind of like a romantasy, it's not like the main characters aren't going to die. I don't think like that's generally what happens. Like it feels like the likelihood of the main character dying is quite slim, so I feel like it doesn't have the same impact that it might do if you were reading a series where the main characters might die. But other than that, I really enjoyed being back in this world and watching the world grow. And I gave this one 4 stars. And that's everything that I read from June to August. So that's basically everything that I read over summer. I also read the volumes of Tokyo Ghoul that I mentioned. And I remember that I watched the anime. I watched the entire anime series when it came out, I think, so probably like over 10 years ago. And I kind of see how the manga is going the same way, where I feel like some of it's kind of losing me, especially the later volumes. It's kind of like going down a different path that I'm not enjoying as much. So we'll see how it goes and if I'm enjoying it more. But I feel like my ratings have gone in the Tokyo Ghoul series from like 5-star to 4 stars to like now 3 stars. So we'll see how the rest of the series goes. But thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these or if you're gonna read any of these, if they're on your TBR. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a like, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!